Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's 5:30, but I think we may have a few people still trickling in because of the joys of Thames Water digging up the road again for, I think, a fatberg this time or something. On behalf of the Streatham Society, can I welcome you all to St Leonard's Church? My name's Robert Doyle of the Festival of the Society's Committee. I feel this ought to be one of those evenings when I say I'm introducing a man who needs no introduction, and I can see he's brought quite a little bit of his own fan club with him, but I'm sure there will be some people here who don't know who Geoff is. Obviously, it's a pleasure to welcome Geoff back. He's spoken to us several times before. Geoff runs a community history project in southwest London called Somerstown 182. He's also a graphic designer in what's left of his real daytime job. We obviously, being at St Leonard's, are very pleased to have somebody from Somerstown here to pay their feudal obeisance at the Mother Church of Somerstown, which was once the westernmost corner of Streatham's extensive historic parish. So the rector has instructed me you can all play your feudal dues and levies as on your way out, or perhaps make a contribution to Geoff's funds. The Somerstown 182 project started as a First World War centenary project, but it's evolved into a more general programme of activities. It's now guided walks and talks, working with schools and putting up plaques. Over the last 10 years, a trail of plaques emerged along the Wandle Valley, shining a light on some of the lesser-known history in the area. And many of these have been through the support and help of my colleagues living and sadly no longer with us from the Streatham Society. And the projects that Geoff's done already range from the youngest soldier to serve his country in the First World War, the Daffodil King, and the Lost Woman of British Jazz, onto a groundbreaking plaque that acknowledged Romany gypsy heritage in Wandsworth. Somehow Geoff even managed to find out that the bugler on the Titanic had lived in Lessingham Avenue nearby. Always look out for those people who you'd least expect. There's also Planet Tooting, an ongoing initiative championing the outstanding migrant contribution to his neighbourhood, which resulted in a new blue plaque on Tooting Market. So you can see Geoff in action on Friday outside the Buzz Bingo Hall, which is also known as the Tooting Granada Cinema, celebrating the musical heritage of that illustrious venue, and he's hoping to acknowledge that with another plaque. So hence there will be a collection bucket at the end to raise money for that latest plaque campaign. And he's also doing food tours, and which he kindly says, with all due respect to Streatham, is the culinary capital of South London. So without further ado, can I ask you to welcome Geoff as our guest speaker today, and on with the show. Thank you.
Okay. All right, everybody. Thanks very much, Robert. And let me just sort of first of all say that it's an absolute privilege and a great honour for me to be here this evening talking about my dad. I've been meaning to do a talk on him for a very long time, and it's just fabulous that I'm here in this beautiful venue, doing this talk, and that it's the Streatham Society of all people. Honestly, when I started my history journey locally 10 years ago, the support I got from people here, very sadly, the likes of Brian Blois, Graham Gower, Kevin Kelly were all so supportive and enthusiastic of me. John obviously still there, Marion, and those people really, really helped me so much, gave me confidence to talk about stuff and make me feel like, I had some value. And honestly, it's so good to be able to deliver this talk tonight. So listen, first of all, let's just get a bit of background. It's all about Dad tonight, Robert, as he was known. Robert is actually my first name, but they decided to call me by my second name, Geoff. And there he is with his collar on at the back there. So this photo just kind of, basically kind of sums up my sort of family history background and why I'm sort of interested in all this stuff. And sitting in this photo here at the front is my uncle Arthur. His son Mark is here tonight. Arthur was actually a prisoner of the Japanese captured in Singapore. The lady on the left-hand side in that picture is my cousin Patricia. She came out home from Singapore as a baby in a basket. You've got Dad there. He was a POW for nearly 4 years. I'm going to tell you all about him tonight. At the back, you've got my grandfather who was wounded in the first day of the Battle of the Somme. He actually served in the 9th Battalion of the Royal Irish Fusiliers, the same regiment as Geoff Cather, who was one of the Streatham VCs. And a few years ago, we all got together here and gathered around the War Memorial in Streatham and put down a plaque for him. So listen, with that lot and all the stories that they could tell, you can see why I'd be interested in all this stuff. But as happens in so many families, did we talk about it? No, we didn't. And sadly, Dad passed away on the 10th of December, 1979. And I don't think I had a single conversation with him about, what he did, what he'd been through, and what happened. And that's me with my grandfather and my brother Peter. He's here tonight, and he's actually in that pram there in the left of that photo. So thankfully, what my dad did was he actually kept a note of what happened. He started his diaries when he was in a camp in a place called Lubeck, which was the first camp he was in 1941. He wrote retrospectively about why he joined the army and what happened. And amazingly, he actually, bought these diaries. They actually survived this is the incredible thing. The Germans would have actually looked at these diaries. They put a stamp on it. They checked that he wasn't writing anything too subversive or talking about mistakes. And actually, this is box here, if you like. It's like a little suitcase. That's the extent of his 27, I think there are, diaries and notebooks in there. So he sort of carried that, brought that home with him, and it was kicking around in the house. Some of the diaries actually ended up with his sister in Australia. So when I went out there in 1990, one of the things that I wanted to do was retrieve the diaries and bring them back so that we had the absolute full set. And, so when it went out there and his sister Helen, I'll show you a picture of her in a minute, gave me the diaries, so I had the full lot. And while I was out there in 1990, I actually met a cousin Michael. And I can't believe it, but he's actually here tonight. He's actually come from Sydney, Australia, just to be here. How about that? In the Streatham Society this evening. And we're really touched. He's with his brother Chris. He's come from Derbyshire with Joe, so that's bad enough. But honestly, Sydney, Australia, that is something else. And I'm really touched. I'll tell you what, that really is an exciting moment for us. So listen, I just want to briefly sort of tell you. As Robert said, I'm a graphic designer, and about 20 years ago, I got really close to the diaries. I think I'd probably read them for the first time around that time when I went out to Australia, late 20s, into my 30s. I kind of read them, and they're quite hard work to read. They're basically a lot of the ink has kind of run. They're in sort of handwriting style, and they're just, it's really, I took some off on a holiday recently and tried reading them, and I realized I can't read them anymore. But of course, modern technology might be able to get through it all. But I have read through them, and I've actually created an abbreviated version of them, which I put online about through somebody got in touch with me, somebody called the Logbook Project, based in Sweden, I think, and they've put the diaries online, so they're accessible, or the abbreviated version is. I also made a timeline. How about that? So this timeline, honestly, it's the work of a complete madman. But this is what it looks like here. And I did this for my kids when they were, to get them interested. And it obviously didn't work because they're not even here tonight. Can you believe it? But honestly, this was great. I blew it out big, stuck it up on the wall. I was trying to find it so I could bring it down here, but I couldn't find it. But honestly, it's great. You can see the timeline, 1938, the World War 39 to 1946. So the top box boxes all kind of say, all indicate kind of big mainstream events like the fall of Singapore and the Battle of El Alamein and what happened, D-Day landing, etc., etc. Then the bottom boxes all have sort of personal things from the diaries, and I even had a color-coded system here. So green is just fairly sort of mundane things. Black was really bad stuff, like a bomb or his friend being killed or something. Purple was generally his movements, and red was quite sort of personal. So I was just kind of glancing at this the other day and just relating to I can't find it now, actually, just looking on there. Yeah, I found a little box. 20th of July, 1944, RAS hears that his brother Tom is engaged, your dad. So there you go. That's enough. And I see there that in December the 29th, RAS, this is 1944, he's still in a camp. RAS, that's Robert Alexander Simmons, that's his name, writes proposing marriage to Joan Macara. So more about Joan later, but that's the personal stuff. But let's just introduce you to the family growing up. This photo is probably taken, I think, probably about 100 years ago. So that's Dad on the right. Honestly, what a snappy dresser. Mum and Dad are both teachers. They're living in a little village. Well, I was going to say on the border, but there wasn't a border in there. A border was just about created around a little village called Auchnacoil in County Tyrone, and honestly, that two of those people on there. The one girl on the left, that's Helen, who emigrated to Australia at the age of 60. She was like really close to Dad. They were really great pals, and sitting on the lap of Mum, their mum called Essie, is my auntie Alma, who died about 10 years ago. So the six of them. Dad on the right there, looking great. Doesn't he look great? Look at the tie, and he's got a little got the little buttoned-up jacket, real snappy dresser, got a full head of hair. He lost all his hair about the age of 18. And next to him, his brother Tom, Michael's dad. And at the back there, we've got Kyle. She was known as Kyle. Frances was her real name, and Molly was. So that's the six Simmons family. There they are a little bit later on. They're actually Mum and Dad have moved to Belfast just before the war, and that's around the time that Dad would have signed up. So there he is. The hair's starting to fall out. Tom's got a good head of hair, and the two girls at the front, Alma and Helen. So they're all together. And guess who that is there? Back in that's probably around mid-60s. So that's me with Dad looking good there, and there he is, actually outside the family home in the middle of Auchnacoil. And he had this car as well. He was very proud of this Austin 7, I think it was. And he actually left that when he joined the army, and he became he left his car at home with his girlfriend called Isabel. But guess what? She wasn't his girlfriend for much longer, because he started getting letters from Joan, who became his wife. And, throughout these diaries, there's a kind of tug of love, a love triangle going on as Dad decides who he wants to spend his life with. Is it frivolous Isabel? She's quite a sort of giddy party girl who, had his car. Or is he going to go for serious Joan, who's a medical student in Liverpool? She actually becomes a doctor. She actually inspired one of my sisters to become a doctor. So more about Joan later. Joan won the battle. So anyway, Dad went to Trinity in Dublin. He studied theology. And he got his first parish, his first job as a clergyman, vicar, was in a place called Convoy near Letterkenny, in sort of right up at the top of Ireland. And there he came into contact with the Montgomery family. Now, if you know your war history, you'll know all about General Monty, Monty of the Desert and El Alamein and all that. Well, he actually comes from an Irish family. And there's a photo from my album that has Bertie. My dad, Robert, was known as Bertie to many, many people. Not my mum, funnily enough. I think she just called him Robert. But he was Bertie to his sisters, and all sorts of nicknames for people as well. He never called people by their proper name. But anyway, there he is. There's Reverend Colin Montgomery. So the story goes that the Montgomery family, were really encouraged him to leave Ireland to go to England in the mid-30s to get away from everything and maybe expand his horizons and what have you. So he ended up first of all in Wallasey, and then he got a parish in the Bullring in Birmingham. There's actually a couple of my fans tonight have come all the way from Birmingham. How about that? Big up. There you go. That's great, isn't it? So I've never been. I must take a trip up to the Bullring and go to his church, St. Martin's in the Bullring. So listen, Dad. So you're getting into 1939, 40 now. And obviously the war has been declared, and he's in Birmingham, and he comes in under the wing of this extraordinary character called Canon Guy Rogers. Now, if you Google Canon Rogers, you'll find a little bit of information about him. He was actually chaplain to 4 monarchs. Okay, and if you've ever watched footage of the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, there's all these bishops with parading around with enormous big kind of hats on and Guy Rogers is one of those. So he's a very, very big cheese indeed, and he was in charge of St. Martin's in the Bullring in Birmingham, and my dad really got on very well with him, though I suspect that a lot of it was to do with the fact that Dad fancied his daughter, who was called Betty. So Betty Rogers pops up quite a lot in the diaries before he kind of forgets about her. And but this guy, Rogers, he was kind of like a mentor. He'd been a padre during the First World War. So he had this background, and he encouraged my dad to basically sign up and to put himself forward as a padre to actually serve in the war. And he ended up, the diaries tell me that, he spent sort of 6 months doing a bit of training, messing around before he was kind of assigned to a regiment. And the regiment that he got assigned to in sort of late 1940-ish was called the 64th Medium Regiment of the Royal Artillery, and they were a TA regiment, and they were based in Islington in London. But anyway, there's a lot of sort of training goes on, and they got sent. Their first posting was to North Africa, and they were known as, maybe, I don't know what it was, because they were known as the Elephant Boys. So they had this little sort of badge on them with an elephant symbol. And so listen, we're now into kind of November 1940, and Dad is on his way for the adventure of his lifetime. Honestly, he's born in Ireland, he's gone to England, but he's never been abroad before. Now suddenly he's on his way to North Africa. And what's happened there is the Italians have have joined the war and are fighting this country, and they're sort of pushing. I think you've got Wavell. I mean, there's plenty of people who know more about military tactics than me, but I've got a very basic grasp of it. But anyway, Dad was part of this force that got sent out to North Africa, and this is the ship that he sailed on. I mean, what's great, these days is, or even 20 years ago when I was putting this together, is you just sort of, you can easily find the HMS SS Otranto that he actually sailed, and off he sailed. And the diaries are full of, the 6-week voyage. They couldn't go through the Mediterranean because it was too dangerous, so they went down the coast of Africa. Their first stop was a place called Dakar in Senegal, and so exciting. The native people that lived there were coming out in canoes and throwing fruit on board, and it was really, really exciting. And then they land in Durban in South Africa, and it's mind blowing. He actually hires a surfboard, bonkers, and is overwhelmed by how rich people are, and how it's so much cleaner and brighter, and seems more prosperous. So he's totally opening up, and then they get into North Africa. This is a 64th Medium Regiment, and not much happens for a while. They're kind of the Italians are kind of like defeated at that point, so they kind of travel over towards Tobruk, and there's all sorts of reports about him meeting, seeing like loads of Italian POWs, and the diary has some fascinating accounts of some of the things that go on. I mean, in this one here, he talks about how he and his mate Robbie get lost in the desert and meet a bunch of Italian officers on horseback, and all sit down to have several nice bottles of Chianti together. And what happened? Yeah, of course, fruit salad and cream and toasting each other. And it says there's no mention of Mussolini, but off they went, and this is it. So this was quite a sort of gentle introduction to the war. But as you can see here in the last line, one of the senior officers talks to them and says, one day, he said solemnly, you'll have to meet the Boche, and the Boche is that means to the Germans, is a different proposition. He concluded his brief remarks by wishing us well. So there they go. That was a little graphic that I made a few years ago, just with the Elephant Boys, and I actually made a T-shirt and was wearing it for a while. Again, just to get the kids interested in the stuff. Desert Invasion, and it was actually called Operation Compass. The Elephant Boys are coming. Watch out. And that's kind of where they went. I mean, it's interesting in the diaries because he doesn't actually, definitely because he didn't want to give away the names of places where he did his training. So High Wycombe was HW, Tetbury was T, Berkhamsted, BH. So those are places in England, but you can see there now, sort of January, February 1941, they're in North Africa. And what happens next? Well, this is pretty. This is where it starts getting a bit scary. I mean, basically, you've got the Italians are kind of have invaded Greece, but are being beaten back, which has got the Nazis kind of involved, and they've invaded Yugoslavia. So a huge force of Nazis is kind of coming down towards Athens. And Dad and the Elephant Boys are part of I think they're called W Force or something, but there's a load of Aussies involved as well, and a load of Kiwis, and they're all coming up north to face them. I mean, my goodness, what's going on here? It's like Dad's army with all the sort of arrows marching across the board, So basically they come, and Dad, see, but it's excitement, and it's a huge convoy of trucks, but it comes to a point where they're basically facing the Germans, and they're at a somewhere called the Monastir Gap, and then a key moment, and this is the kind of stuff that is not mentioned in the diaries, but the message, what happened at this point was that the Ultra Code was the guy in charge of all this is somebody called General Freiberg, who's a Kiwi, and he gets the message. He's indoctrinated in Ultra, and he gets the message that you're going to have to turn around and head back because you're going to get massacred. So this is a lucky escape for me and all his subsequent generations because they turned back, and they're on the retreat now. A massive army of German forces coming through from northern Greece. And it's back to Athens. And on the way, they're getting bombed all the time. It's really, really frightening. This is where, really the fear is starting to kick in because these Stukas are kind of coming overhead. And at one point, very sad, Dad's got to know the commanding officer, Colonel Ronald Sire of the 64th Medium Regiment. And there's one of the, whilst they're all in a big convoy of trucks, he gets out and they have a spot, and a bomber comes over, and basically he dies. So it was great, in years I can double check that with the Commonwealth War Graves records and kind of find out that, he had a wife called Betty back in Richmond. Just get to know a little bit more about him and kind of confirm what happened. And he's buried in a place called Phaleron War Cemetery somewhere in Greece. And honestly, this is the scariest moment of the entire war for my dad, because basically at one point I'll read this out to you. It's about 7 a.m. and in broad daylight I had wandered off the road with a view to finding a quiet spot to relieve myself, when without the slightest warning 3 or 4 enemy aircraft burst down on us, machine gunning. I was a quarter of the way across a ploughed field and was properly caught. I dived at once for the ditch, but I had no hope of reaching it. Down I went to the ground, watching the plane streaking towards me at a height of 50 feet with all its machine guns blazing. I thought it was the end, for bullets were exploding along the field and kicking up gouts of dust. I tensed my body for the coming shock and sucked in my breath. I don't think I was frightened, just vaguely annoyed at being caught so blatantly in the open. I closed my eyes and nothing happened. In a second, the screaming, spitting plane was 200 yards away. So pretty much a close escape, and that's what he would have seen. That's a Stuka bomber kind of flying over Dad, caught short in the field. And, he's kind of like, clearly, things are, they're like a bunch of what are they going to do? They're going to try and get to North Africa and kind of back to Cairo and kind of regroup, but it's getting really bad. They're ditching their ammunition. They're told to kind of chuck it, which really didn't help when it came to kind of being stuck on Crete. But this went down. In fact, this was actually told to me by his wife, his first wife, Joan's sister. About 30 years ago, she said, your dad buried his communion cups, and left a note. And, this is what he did. He thought, I'm going to lose these precious, religious, he actually uses a great word here. What was it? My professional appurtenances, so stuff that he would have used, take communion in church, and he buried it all, and he left a note saying, whoever opens it, be you German or Greek, please take care of these religious articles, and when the war is over, get in touch with me. So yeah, that's the plan. I'm going to go over and look for them. Yeah. Anyway, I hope to recover these articles one day. Well, we'll see about that. That's kind of where it would have happened, near Mount Olympus. And what happened was the Germans pushed down. They basically raised the flag in Athens, and Dad's on a boat now trying to get to North Africa, but he ends up on the island of Crete. So this is like, this is where it all happened for him. This is where he was captured on the island of Crete. He was caught up in the biggest parachute invasion in history. Basically this is a sort of key strategic location in the Mediterranean. Dad's hoping to get off there, but he witnesses the biggest parachute invasion, and how scary this would be for him. He's kind of like basically in what's known as a slit trench, which is like you dig a shallow grave for yourself and kind of lie in it and hope for the best. And the sky would have been thick with parachutists, German parachutists. I've got to think of the German name for this. They're called Fallschirmjägers. So these actually these would have been absolutely fit, young, highly trained men, but for them going into what was an absolute hellhole. There was basically they were heavily outnumbered. They were coming out of the sky, and they had the Cretan population, but they didn't have. They certainly didn't have Dad pointing a gun at them, because he was because he was a padre. He wasn't actually a combatant as such, so he wasn't killing anybody, but he so he's wandering around in a bit of a daze at this point. It's absolutely, I've read so many books about this and kind of absorbed what happened. I've spoken to some people from Crete whose families were there at the time, and it's still really raw. This huge invading army is coming in, and there was a bad time for these parachutists coming down. But this is fascinating because and I'm really this is like Dad's first encounter with a German. And he's really written very descriptively about them here. He was a splendid-looking fellow. A ruddy face, a broken nose, and an aggressive chin gave him a tough, dashing appearance. He saluted firmly and began at once in passable English. I wish to speak with the English commander. Who is he? Anyway, they kind of what he says later is that he snatched, the German guy snatched his water bottle, which was slung loosely round my neck, flicked out the cork, and started drinking from it. I vaguely resented his action, but was too surprised to do anything about it. Was ist das? He barked. Wasser? No, I said, lime juice. So it's kind of, it's kind of weird. It's having this really sort of friendly encounter, whereas you kind of think everybody would have been just killing each other or kind of, running away. Anyway, this was a total, from the sort of Allied perspective, this was a complete disaster. The numbers were the Allied numbers were vastly superior, but they messed up. Freyberg, he might have got his ultra codes right, but he thought that an assault was coming from the sea, and he didn't have the proper defenses, and they were all fighting over an airfield at a place called Malemi. This is Suda Bay, where Dad landed. His ship landed in Suda Bay, and a lot of his colleagues are buried there. And there's one in particular that I just want to mention, seeing as we're here in Streatham, because in his diary, Dad talks about somebody called Fred Sawyer, who was a driver in one of the trucks. You can see the day there, 26th of May, 1941, killed, age 22. And here's how it happened, basically. And this is Dad wrote in the diary. The bombs have dropped, and three men were sort of buried. 3 men were unconscious, hopelessly knotted together. Extricating them was a delicate job, for they were mixed up with stones, clay, and scrub. It took 2 hours to get them out. 2 of them revived, and after being released and rubbed down, were able to walk, though they were famished with cold, weak at the knees, and a bit incoherent. Sawyer, the driver of the water cart, was the 3rd, and he was dead, sadly. And his body was brought into the king's house. That's the king of Greece, who was in Hania at the time, and the idea is he should be buried the next day. Anyway, that was I visited, when I was over there recently, we visited the cemetery and had a look in all these cemeteries. Commonwealth War Graves Commission cemeteries have got these books with listing all the people in there, and there was Gunner Fred Sawyer, 64th Medium Regiment, son of Joseph and Lillian Mary Sawyer of Streatham. So there you go, a bit of a local connection. So, Dad, so back to my crazy, maniac graphics again, and I was determined to sort of, follow the footsteps of my dad as he was fleeing from the Nazis. I mean, literally at this point, he's coming from the north of Crete near Hania, and he's trying to what they're trying to do is get to the south coast in a place called Sfakia, and that's where all the boats are leaving, and hopefully he's going to get off to North Africa. So all the time most of this journey is on foot, though he manages to jump in a truck a little bit, but he names some of the places that he goes through, and he's in a gorge at one point, and he's hungry, and he's tired, and he's got separated from his battalion. I mean, that's a little picture there of one of the places that he passed through. And still today, there's bits of old military equipment knocking around, and that's the Imbros Gorge. That's me and my son Jay stepping out into the gorge, and seeing where our dad was, and his granddad, basically treading in his footsteps. Kind of, 75 years later, really, really amazing. We came out of the gorge, and, you can kind of see the sea emerging, and he must have thought, I can get out of this, I can survive, and he ends up in a little village called Komitades, the Komitades Gorge, and the sea is there, but it's complete chaos in this village. I mean, it's all recounted in the diaries, and it still looks like it must have done in the 1940s. I mean, there's bits of rifle kind of, propping up fences. Some of the houses haven't been done up. It's just a ramshackle old village. It's got a couple of kind of tavernas. But most of the kind of historical reminder stuff is in Sfakia itself on the coast. But that's where Dad was. It was really, honestly, it was just so moving to actually be in this place where he got captured by the Nazis, and that's my little map there. But there was caves, there was all sorts. There was these prickly pear fruit growing everywhere at the time. And this spot in particular was really moving because I'm just going to read you an extract of what happened. Dad was actually having a dip in the sea. He was desperately trying to get to the evacuation point, but it was all chaos and numbers were limited, and there was all sorts of characters who had more chance of getting out. I mean, an extraordinary range of people. Freyberg, who was in command, was in one cave. Evelyn Waugh, you know Evelyn Waugh, he was in another. He was working for special operations or something, has written about this. Jet Brigadier Lucky Laycock, who was another kind of war hero who's in charge of a bunch of commandos. He was there. They were all kind of jostling for permission. There was loads of Australians. It was madness. Everybody was hungry. And it was at this little church in the village of Comidades that was a kind of rounding up point where Dad was taken. And inside its wall, there was a large concourse, all very dejected, looking and completely done in. We straggled in. It was being used as a hospital, and every moment mournful shouts of "make way there" announced the arrival of fresh stretcher cases. I watched these doleful processions for a few minutes, men being brought in all stages of butchery. Some were dying, some were unconscious, some in dreadful agony, all of them begrimed with dirt and splashed with blood. Often the stretchers were soaked with blood and dripped a trail as they went. It must have reached a real low point. This is like they're being bombed, they're being attacked. It says here that the German troops were pitting out large swastikas on top of the flat buildings. It's crazy that we were actually there and kind of saw this. But anyway, that's where he was picked up. That's Slovakia, which is where he was trying to get to, and you can see that maybe it was quite. I often think it was probably quite lucky that for me and future generations that he was actually picked up, because a lot of his regiment later died in Tunis and other battlefields. But and several boats that did get off from Crete from Slovakia were actually bombed. And there's a little more. And listen, I went into, it's been great, to kind of like have these diaries, but also add to the research by sort of visiting places like the Imperial War Museum, where the war diary of the 64th Regiment actually mentions Dad by name. Kind of here, 29th of May, everybody's getting split up, no sign of Bob Halligan. 21 hours. Started for beach, terrible going over Goats Track. Jennings, last to see Padre at control point. That's Dad, the Padre. He's gone missing, separated from his regiment. He's on his own. And just to say, this is the German cemetery on Crete, a place called Malame. Absolutely fascinating to go there and see where it happened. That photo particularly interested me because it was taken in 1974 when the German cemetery opened, and all these really sort of ordinary everyday people will look in there, sisters, brothers, mothers, family, going to see where so many young people died. But listen, what's happening now to Dad? This is it. This is the start of the big adventure for him, or not whatever it was. This is the start of 3 years and 10 months of captivity. He's been captured on Crete. He's taken on a Junkers aeroplane. He's really scared. The plane is really rattly, and he's probably never been on a plane. I think it's probably the only flight he ever took in his life is from Crete to Athens, and then he gets taken to a holding camp called Dulag 185 in Salonika, Thessaloniki in north of Athens. And that is a really terrible place. It was like really hot. It was horrible, and lots of shootings and not looked after very well, the lack of food. But then he's put on a train, basically a cattle wagon, absolutely rammed in, no windows, basic food. Everybody, so many people suffering from dysentery, puking up. It's horrible. It's probably the worst 8 days of his life, traveling through Yugoslavia, Austria, through Germany to Hamburg, and the first camp that he's in. And here he is. He's in Lübeck now, and he's got your name and your number, Robert Simmons, 3356, and the XC there is the name of the camp that he was in, Oflag XC. Anyone good at some Roman numerals? What is it 90, Offlag 90 in Lubeck. And, this is a map here showing all the places that he's been to, all the camps, starting with Lubeck and then move into a place called Warburg. Camp number 3, it was near Munich, Moosburg. He was there for nearly 2 years. That was an enormous camp. And then the one that really baffles me, he was in a camp called Sagan, Stalag Luft 3, which is actually very well known because it's the Great Escape camp. And all the times that we sat and watched, that film at Christmas, there's the commandant. You can almost see him now, can't you? And he never said to me that was, I did, I was, I know my brother Pete did a school project on it. I'm not sure if Dad was still alive at that point, but we didn't really know what was going on. We just knew that he had the diaries, and it's crazy when you think about it. Because I was just thinking today, back in the sort of 70s, 60s, definitely in the 70s when we were growing up, we were still bombarded with comics, Commando magazines, Victor. It was all about the war on war films on the telly all the time. So it was very much part of the growing. Even in Northern Ireland, we had toy guns, and we were kind of having little battles and stuff, and talking about Jerry's and stuff, and yet we had this man in our house, and we didn't tap into all the knowledge that he could have told us about. But fascinating to see all these camps. And my brother, I think, went to one of them. You see number 5 up there in the top right corner. That was Stalag Luft 6, which is a really nasty place. Heidekrug. It's now in modern day Lithuania. And here's some extracts from the diaries. This one is actually in Offlag 9, I think. So this is Warburg, and the excitement here is our next interest now is food. I wish to blazes they'd give us those Red Cross parcels. So pretty hungry, and the Red Cross parcels have come, and he's even put the time in. 1900 hours, the time when they got those parcels in October. This photo was, I love this photo. So he did, as well as his diaries, he actually had a little photo album as well. And this photo was taken, this reminds me of a kind of 1980s kind of synthesizer pop duo, a bit like sort of Depeche Mode or something, do you know what I mean? So he's actually wearing, Dad's on the left there, he's actually wearing a Yugoslav tunic. And the guy on the right is called, he just says in the album, it just says Jimmy James, who might, outside Hut 10, and Hut 10 was one of the the huts that he was staying in this Warburg place, Offlag. Now this on to the next one, and this was sort of December 1941, I think. Yeah, so this is the big one in Moosburg, Munich. Stammlager 7A. So this was a pretty serious camp. It was, up to 200,000 people in there at one point, and lots of weird stuff going on in this camp. I've got to tell you, Dad's accounts from here, very vivid. Now, this photo he actually sent, and apologies, Dad, for showing this photo, because apparently his mum didn't like this photo and insisted. She said, Robert, or Bertie, whatever she called him, she said, don't be sending me any more photos of you taking your shirt off like this. So sorry, Dad, I'm showing this photo of you here, but isn't it a lovely photo? We also know the second on the left there, he's Dr. Robert Pollock from Monaghan, and one of my aunties knew some of his descendants, and he was quite a character. He was a Trinity contemporary of Dad. So his old mates were kind of turning up here, at these camps from time to time. The other two guys are two Russians. And, the Russians, he was very conscious they were being treated really badly, really totally different league from the sort of main Allied prisoners. And in this camp, there was all sorts of funny stuff going on. There's a picture of what it was like, conditions. Dad was dabbling. Again, this is a bit sacrilegious, but and definitely not approved by the higher up people. He was dabbling with spiritualism in the camp. But you've got to remember, these people don't know what's happening. They might think the world's going to end tomorrow, and they're doing anything. They've got a lot of time in their hands, but they're all wondering, what's around the corner? When's the war going to end? And they have these regular kind of seances and a Ouija board and ask a communing with the. It was very popular in the 1930s, spiritualism. So this is only 1942, but you can see some of the diary here. Is actually sort of writes down some of the stuff that's going on. And I mentioned the Russians. This is around the time of the Russians have defeated the Germans at Stalingrad. The war is starting to turn now. I mean, all the time that he's in this camp, they've got a radio. He doesn't actually mention that in here, but that's a very big deal. So they kind of know what's going on in the outside world, and they're aware of, that this is really bad for German morale and that things are turning. So they have a dinner with the Russians, and Dad's even writing some stuff down here in Russian. Here's what's on the menu: West End cocktail, creamed potatoes, meat roll, sardines on toast. Not bad. So yeah, that's the Russian. And it was around this time, while he was in Munich, that he's hearing about things that I didn't know anything about until about 20 years ago. I read about Sophie Scholl. Do you all know about Sophie Scholl and the White Rose movement? So these are like very, very brave young German students who kind of were determined to kind of stand up and create an opposition to the Nazi regime. This is in 1943 in Munich, and of course it all ended very badly for them, and they were all, I think, guillotined and pretty nasty. But Sophie Scholl is somebody who is remembered. I was really glad that was mentioned in the diary and that Dad talked about it. Now I think we're getting up to 8:15, Robert, aren't we? So listen, as I expected, I'm gonna have a little bit of a breather now, and you're all very welcome to what's on the menu, Robert? There's tea and a little drop of wine for everybody, and maybe some cake, right? Maybe some sardines on toast. How about that? Yeah.
So thank you, everyone. So we have a 20-minute break now. The bar will be open, and also the refreshment bar will be open for coffee, tea, and cakes. So we'll see you all in 20 minutes' time. And also do have a look at the items on display on the various tables. While people are taking their seats, just a quick reminder. So for those of you who are paid up members of the Streatham Society, the next event will be a members-only Christmas social on Tuesday, the 2nd of December. For those of you who aren't members, why aren't you? And you could have been paying at the back of the hall. We will take your cash if you are in arrears next month, but you can pay that, which will be... But I don't know if there's any other details of walks. I think, has the walks season now finished, or are there any rescheduled Lambeth tour guide walks I need to make people aware of? I think they are now back until the spring, aren't they? In which case, there's one other announcement about an upcoming event. Do I see?
Thank you. In the spirit of Geoff's excellent and very interesting talk, it's 80 years since the end of the Second World War, and the Armistice Day service, as always, will be at Streatham War Memorial, 10:30 on this Sunday. I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, over to Geoff. This is where you learn that we're actually only a third of the way through.
Right. Okay. Listen, everybody. We're back in where were we? We got as far as Moosburg outside Munich, and during the break there, somebody said, you know what, you haven't talked about religion so far, and I've got to say that right the way through this diary, Dad is beating himself up all the time about his inability to get through to be able to connect in a kind of religious way with, you know, the everyday sort of POWs that he encounters, and he feels really bad about that and describes himself as a passenger at one point, and, you know, why am I here? But, you know, he does, on the other side, he kind of discovers that, you know, he's very good at talking to people, connecting with people, almost being like a sort of counselor, social worker, and in one camp in particular, he was really, really helpful to a lot of people, to such an extent that he's actually mentioned in an international report that was put together by the YMCA, and I actually found a commendation to him in some documents in the National Archives that I was really, really proud of him. And one of my sisters was telling me, she said, "Oh wow, that tallies with the fact that when he was a young curate in Donegal, he connected with a psychiatric hospital in the town of Letterkenny, and visited there a lot as a young cleric, and so he liked helping people and you know, talking to them, and, you know, right through his life, you know, I remember him being very good at kind of visiting elderly parishioners and generally sort of, you know, connecting with people. But listen, I want to just briefly mention, you know, what was going on in this Stalag Moosburg 7A. It was an extraordinary camp, 2,000 men. You know, Dad was there in Christmas 1941. One of the highlights of his Second World War incarceration was when he actually preached a service in the cathedral. Apparently there were 700 POWs were marched into the center of Munich and actually preached in this candlelit cathedral, and it must have been quite a moment. But they were being bombed at the time. There was all sorts of things going on. There was also this is very near the Dachau concentration camp, and although Dad never went there, he went to several work camps quite nearby, which was where the average, you know, British soldier who wasn't an officer would have been working, and, you know, things were very hard, and word was getting out that, you know, some people were treated much better than others. But for the average Brit officer in this Stalag camp, one thing that really, really struck me when I read the diaries was the freedom that they got. I mean, these guys were actually walking out of the camp at night. They had girlfriends, German girlfriends in the town. Sometimes the German girls came back to the camp. They didn't actually come in, but they would be arranging dates at the gates of the camp. One guy actually went and stayed with his girlfriend for 3 weeks before getting bored. I mean, all this is not what is portrayed in the war films at the time or what. So it was really, but he was quite open about it. And also at the next camp that he is at, which let me just whiz through the Great Escape. He's in Stalag Luft 3 in Sagan, and he gets on really well with it. I mean, this is the one, because obviously we all know Steve McQueen riding the bike and Charles Bronson. I mean, how many times have you seen it? And we know the commandant, and he's really kindly and kind of, you know, he's not the one who's involved in the shooting of the guys that escape. That's the SS on Hitler's orders get involved. But the commandant is a dear old thing. He speaks English perfectly and has all the fatherly touches of an old man. He shook hands with everybody in the room, including the typist, and patted us on the back at the same time. And this guy actually came to visit another camp that he was in. But, you know, the picture he posts of this particular Great Escape camp is very similar to what we see on the telly. But anyway, that's him. That's Colonel von Lindleiner, who was the man in that camp. And obviously, you know, once those prisoners were escaped and shot, and he was kind of seen as being too soft and probably sent off to the Russian front or somewhere. But he did survive the war, and now this is the next destination for Dad. This is Heidekrug, Stalag Luft 6, right up in the in sort of modern day Lithuania. You know, very, very inhospitable kind of place. You know, welcome. This is what we're into here. And this camp has got lots of stories. I mean, here's drawings that Dad has done of the hut that he's in. There's been a couple of books written about it. This one here, the Sergeant Escapers. It's a camp for non-commissioned officers. So there's quite a lot of characters in here, and there's not any of the kind of, let's have a jolly walk in the country or that seems to be going on at back in Munich. This is some serious escaping going on, and all sorts of things. And this guy here pops up in the diaries and in the book. Dad was really kind of quite attached to this guy. They became very friendly counselors, and he's a young airman called George Grimson, who was actually from Putney. And Grimson is actually, I just want to sort of read something that was written about Grimson in that book by somebody called Airy Neve, who you'll all know was an MP and was I think in Colditz himself. And he wrote that there were, of course, heroes and heroines of secret escape lines in enemy occupied territory. But George Grimson operated his own route for fellow prisoners of war, recruiting Poles and Germans. He organized a line to the Baltic ports, complete with safe houses. He got his friends home. There is no one really like Grimson in the history of escape. Yet, nobody's heard of him. And George Grimson, he could be a candidate for a blue plaque one day. That's his house in Putney. Who knows? Another one was a Flight Sergeant James Dixie Deans. Again, a big escape organizer. This is 1944. You get into the sort of realm of the V1 and the V2 rockets. They're being launched from not very far away from here on the sort of Baltic coast. And this guy was communicating with, back home, sending secret messages. And Dad was, at this point, he was free to kind of go outside the camp, and he went for walks. He got very friendly with the assistant commandant in this camp. There's actually a picture of Dad there taking a funeral at this camp. But it's fascinating. His relationship with this von Teuber, the assistant commandant, is something quite extraordinary. And in Dad's photo album, I remember I told you, I showed you a couple of photos. He's actually got photos of some of the Nazis. I mean, these guys, he had some kind of relationship with him. He saw them, and that's one thing throughout the book. He's aware that a lot of people, are kind of there because of circumstances and family on the outside. They're doing what they have to do, and he does befriend a few of them, and he even gets into a correspondence with a couple of people after the war. But I don't know that it doesn't say on who they are, but I suspect that might be von Teuber on the right there, what happened? So von Teuber, he got so friendly. I mean, this is totally bizarre. So Dad's birthday on 21st of November, his 32nd birthday, he actually gets sent a bottle of champagne by the voice. I mean, what is going on here? Girlfriends, bottles of champagne. For a lot, and he's out swimming in a lake, going on cycle rides. But obviously what he can't say in the diaries is that I'm going out on these cycle rides, I'm swimming, I'm chatting up von Teuber, and he's probably going back to Dixie Deans and giving him all sorts of information which will help in escape routes. That's probably what was going on there. And I was told by my dad's best man about 20 years ago that he was up to all sorts of, he was writing letters back to Guy Rogers, the chaplain to the king, and all this sort of stuff. And so, there's much more, so many questions to ask him, but, you can't, can you? So that's, but Dad did get into hot water in this camp. He he basically got accused of being in favor of bombing civilians, which sounds crazy, but, so it was probably a bit of a mix-up. But anyway, an OKW order came through from the German High Command. And that could have been very nasty, but it just resulted in transfer to another camp. And this fascinating document survived. I was trying to bring it along tonight, but I couldn't find it, I'm afraid. Shame to say. Thankfully, I've scanned it. But this is like a report card. I was telling my kids, you get school reports. Dad got this report from Stalag Luft 6. Oh, fascinating. It's got his fingerprints on there, his mugshot, his dad's address in Belfast. It tells me, his name of his mother. I was talking about this with cousin Chris last night. We've got Hobson Hobson is on the Nazi report card as his mother's maiden name. And at the bottom, it's got a few lines in German, and I've had a few of my German pals kind of translate it. What's going on there is basically this man is being transferred to another camp because he is a dangerous rabble-rouser, and he is capable of influencing people with his speeches, and he needs to be watched. So lucky he got away with a report card and got moved on. That's it there. That's the word there. The best word they could come up with was rabble rouser. So clearly somebody who could maybe have started something there. Anyway, Dad's off to now. He's off to his last destination. Well, he's in a place called Mariš Trubau in Czechoslovakia, but for about 6 weeks. But then everybody there gets moved to Brunswick, off flag 79. So off flag 79 is in Brunswick, in near Hanover, and this is where things get quite dangerous again, because this is getting towards the the tail end of the war, and the RAF are raiding, and bombs are falling on the camp. So it's like being back in Crete again, and there's several kind of nasty incidents there, and listen, also, life is getting really tough in Germany. The Red Cross parcels aren't coming through as frequently. The food has generally been okay in the camp, is now really bad, and he's in short supply, and he's losing weight. So he keeps a little record here. This is Dad's kind of, weight loss. Between 1944, 14 stone, that's quite a healthy weight, isn't it? So he obviously wasn't doing too badly, but it drops away to 10 stone 11 in April 1945, just 3 days before he and you can see how between the 9th of April and the 18th of April, he puts on, quite a bit of weight, because they're all overeating once they've been liberated from there. But honestly, he was eating all sorts of strange stuff. He was really into. For some reason, he went through this phase of making puddings that were made out of anything he could get his hands on. Basically, it could be acorns, it could be leftover porridge, wood shavings, old vegetables. All mixed up. Honestly, at this point, he was in a bit of a bad way, and he used this thing here. This is Klim powdered milk. So he used these tins to kind of make these steamed puddings that he said, used to kind of like basically stop him from being hungry for about 16 hours, but it was like having cement in his stomach. And, the side effect of all this was that, he came out a very sick guy over the next few years. He very nearly died in his, a few years after the war. He had something called mesenteric thrombosis, most of his gut removed. He had 2 belly buttons. That was a source of great amusement to us growing up. Dad's got 2 belly buttons, but we never sort of said why, because making too many dodgy puddings in off flag 79. And I've got to mention and also this is the end of the war, and he's got so much time on his hands. He's obsessing. At this point, he's kind of lost interest in kind of preaching, and it's basically given up on trying to to have any kind of like church parade services to the POWs, and he's obsessing about this woman in the middle. So this is Joan Macara, is his old girlfriend from Wallasey in Liverpool, who started writing him letters, and I forget the exact number of letters, but I think there was about one every 2 weeks. And where's the letter from Joan coming through? It's becoming a big deal. And Joan, who do I want to be with? Joan, who's like, Joan's joined the, I forget what she joined, the Royal Army Service Corps, and went off to India. What's she doing? Wait around. I'm going to get released soon and get married. And, or Isabel, she's got my car. What am I going to do? What a dilemma. But, he must have, and I don't know how it worked out for Isabel, but my eldest sister, so his firstborn, was called Margaret Isabel in her honor. So, that's a fair deal, isn't it? You get the baby named after you and maybe get to keep the car. I don't know, but you don't get the hand of Dad's hand. So yeah, just some of the stuff he was eating here. I think January 1941 is a bad time. German stew, boiled potatoes, pea soup. turnips. He loved turnips, and he loved, some of his habits from wartime extended into my memory of him growing up. He liked fiddling around in the kitchen and kind of making strange kind of concoctions and boiling, putting bread into milk and boiling it up and currants and stuff and not wasting anything. I mean, myself and my brother would have been in big trouble if we left any food behind, any kind of waste. Nothing goes to waste. You have to, drink the juice out of the pea tins of pea. It was bad enough in the 70s with the convenience food coming through, but anyway, he was really conscious of that. And then comes the big day. Listen, this is it. Liberation Diary, the 12th of April, 1945, and it's diary number 31. He's even got a time on there, 9:23. This is the day of deliverance, and the American 9th Army are kind of bursting into across Germany. They're discovering the terrible camps I think the one near this place might have been Bergen-Belsen, they're opening that. The cameras are there, the film crew, the cameras are actually there at this camp. There's footage of this day. It's quite incredible. Pictures have been drawn. It's quite something. And, I've put some things on the table over there. One of the things that happens in the camp is that the prisoners all have a whip round towards the end of their time there. They're kind of thinking, we want to memorialize our experience and do something for the youth back home who may be living in bombed areas. And 2 areas were suggested, one in North Kensington, just off the North End Road in Fulham, where the Clement Attlee estate is, and the Brunswick Boys Club opened up there in 1949. You can see the Duke of Edinburgh opened it up. So, the Brunswick Boys Club, named after the camp, and still going strong today. It's now called Young People. It's not just a boys' club. But listen, I went there with my children about 15 years ago, and we went we didn't even ring up in advance. We just knocked on the door, and this guy came down, and I said, yeah, my dad used to be in this camp. And he goes, oh, you might like to come upstairs, and we've got a little display up there of the pre-OW camp, and this photo was on display. So I looked at this photo and I kind of scanned across. This is the day of liberation photo, 12th of April, 1945. Look at that. There he is. I picked him out in the photo. Extraordinary. Isn't that amazing? That was on display in the Brunswick Boys Club in Fulham. And there's a photo there of General Simpson of the 9th, who was the American in charge of the liberation of that camp. There he is. He looks a little bit thin, definitely doesn't quite look like himself, but he's still got his collar on. And this film is actually Pathé newsreel footage of the camp being liberated. It's quite moving, actually. Men out of cages. It lasts for about 4 minutes. Really interesting. That's Dad's camp off Flag 79. And, you just have to look at the ethnicity of some of the people in the camp. There's people from the Middle East, people from South Asia, Palestine, a lot of different cultures. And Dad kind of talked about that. He talked about meeting soldiers from one guy actually said to him, oh, you've got to come to Mauritius after the war. Mauritius is where it's at. Come over to my lovely island on the Caribbean or wherever it is in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And big mistake. So that was what was going on. There he is. That's Dad in just before the war in his. So you'll want to know what happened next, right? Okay, so he gets out. I mean, it's shocking. The diaries just kind of end. That's it. He gets, he's out. He talks about coming back to England and getting a big feed. It's all about food, what he ate. But what happened next? So basically, at some stage, very soon afterwards, Joan came back. This is Joan Makara from Wallasey. She came back from India, from the Royal Army Medical Corps. There they are. That is actually their I think that's their passport. So that's where they had the address in Birmingham, where they were living, Station Road or something. And there they are, January 1946. Husband and wife on the same passport. Dad's still sporting the Hitler moustache, which would have been not a good look, really, he would have thought at that time, but he obviously stuck with it. this photo, my cousin Chris just sent me this the other day. This is kind of like, this is my two sisters and Dad and Joan. This is taken probably around 1949, and the two little girls, and Dad and Joan, at their he got a job in Watford, so he's just north of London and in charge of a vicarage there. There he is meeting the bishop at St Andrews. And this photo here is another one that my cousins have given me out of the family album. And oh my God, what is this? Strange box which has popped up here. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so there's the family gathering. Very, very sad photo that, because that's probably Dad's just come out of St Thomas's Hospital. You can see his jacket looks quite sort of, it's hanging off him. He's lost a bit of weight. He's not too well. There's the two girls in front of him, and Joan very sadly died of a brain hemorrhage, in 1954, October 1954, at the age of 38. So very, very sad. He lost his wife after all that, and he's left stranded in Watford. But coming on the scene was this young lady here. Here she is, 1941. This is June Lendrum, who was actually quite a bit younger than him, and she was also served during the war. She was a WAF in the served in North Africa, trained from the age of 18, got a uniform. There she is. That's her paperwork. And it was such a great day. In the summer, it would have been her 100th birthday. So I did a walk in Streatham Cemetery dedicated to her, and talking about other family members and wartime connections. It was such a great thing to do. So it's been so good to do Dad tonight and kind of bring it round. And there they are. There's Dad. He's now living in Northern Ireland. He's moved back there basically because he's so ill, and he's about to, he's under a lot of strain, and a big parish in Watford is not what he wants to deal with. He's basically back home in Northern Ireland in a quiet little place called Kilskeary in County Tyrone, and that's where he meets June Lendrum, and that's where me and my brother Pete come along. So we're on the scene now, and there we are with cousin Joanna and my sisters Margaret and Kitty and Joan's sister. There, all going on the caravan holidays and having a nice time. There we are with Dad. There he is, and that's one of the last photos of him. And a few years, about 10 years ago, I made a little film of him. We probably don't have time to show it, but the last slide in the film just has a little message there. It was written by a friend from Crete, and I just wanted to express my thanks to the people of Crete who kind of fed him, kind of kept him going during that time when he was separated from his regiment and was really hiding in caves and was given food. He actually tasted an olive for the first time, and it made him sick because he'd never had an olive. You don't get olives in the 1940s in Letterkenny, but there you go. So listen, we're pretty much there, but I just wanted to sort of finish off by saying I just wanted to sort of thank Robert, who's here from the Streatham Society, who's been such a great supporter of me recently in our efforts to kind of put a blue plaque up on the Granada Theatre. And if you're around on Friday night and you're passing through Tooting, we're going to be outside there at 5:30 putting that on. And Robert Holden said that there might not. Is there anybody doing walks at this time of year? Who would be mad enough? Except me. I am doing a walk in Wimbledon Cemetery because myself and Tracy over there have done all the cemeteries around here, but we haven't done Wimbledon Cemetery, so we're going to do that. Now, listen, before you go tonight, as I said, I do put up plaques in the area, and I all of them have sort of been paid for by people who turn up on my walks and just give a little small donation, and we then use that to put up the plaques. And it's great. It's inspired Wandsworth Council to get their act together, and they're putting up plaques all over the place now. So, and it's just great for sort of, everybody taking a pride in their area and making it a better place to live. So once again, thank you so much. Have we got time for questions, or have we run out of time? We're okay for, has anybody got any questions for me about Dad or about anything really? Yeah. They got married in 1946. I hope, because one of my sisters was born that year. Yeah, but I have never been able. I don't know where they got married or how and they're a bit vague about that. Yeah. No wedding photos. It was pretty hand to mouth. So, and the wedding with my mum is on cine film. And one thing I should say, I mean, Dad, when he was in these camps, he was, obviously there was radios, there was kind of people were fiddling and making things and kind of wires and forging documents and stuff. And he was fascinated with that. He was always fiddling with wires and electricals, and he had local kids who were kind of into that sort of stuff, were kind of like drawn to him, and he was kind of like always kind of like he would never get any kind of a man in to do something. He'd always try and fix something himself. So the house was just full of odd plugs and sockets and wires, to such an extent that my cousin said that apparently in your family that it was that sort of trying to sort of fiddle with something was known as doing an Uncle Bertie. Is that right? Because it's just so that's sort of. But yeah, so I don't know about that. Yeah, about when they got married. I think it was because his role there was as a padre, as a chaplain, was to kind of cater for the spiritual needs of the men in that camp, and it was just depending on how many people were there and or whether there was an available one. He was kind of at one point he was moved because there was only two of them catering for the needs of 1,000 prisoners. So. But at another camp, he was one of 14, and he wanted to be moved from it, but that didn't happen. But it was just that one the thing where he was a bit of a naughty boy, or he spoke out of tone, or was a rabble rouser. That was the big move, and knowing all the things that you do know about what could happen to people if they stepped out of line with the Nazis, he pretty much got away with it, didn't he? Really, I think to just be transferred could have just ended up, Yeah. Yeah.
I suspect that might have been plausible deniability. If you find out something, or they find out that you know something, or it came through on this. And that's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, I'm not too. I mean, all I know is that it was frowned upon by the senior people in the camp. It would definitely, if his bosses in the church knew about that. Yeah, but he did have a lifelong fascination with the supernatural, which is probably one of the reasons why I do a walk called Spooking Tooting on Halloween. He was interested in he used to kind of like when a bunch of kids, when we were on holiday in a caravan and be sitting around telling ghost stories, he kind of turned up with a kind of under a sheet, and he did set tape recorders at night. We moved into an spooky old railway station house, and he left a tape running all night because I didn't want to know about this when I was 9 or 10. But apparently, there was some story about some boy haunted the railway line, and so he was really. And we did do a few sessions with and he hypnotized people as well. He actually hypnotized a few women to stop them smoking. Yeah. No, I've got what I did, because honestly, it's really. I mean, I did a rough. I don't know how I worked this out, but I think it's about 1 million words in these diaries. But I abbreviated some of the salient points and have created what I call an abbreviated document, which is quite sort of visual and manageable, but not the whole lot. And I'm desperate to get into them, because I think there's nuggets there. The last time I read them fully was probably about 15 years ago. And I think there's now, there's other things I want. I mean, it's fascinating. Like, I had quite a bad back problem about 15 years ago, and I read in the diaries that Dad was having back problems in his 30s, and he actually said, "Oh, my mother has terrible back problems." So there's a genetic kind of link to that,
Yeah, Geoff.
Hi, Tony.
Can you clarify whether your father, the diaries are great, but when you knew your father, did he talk to you about the war? Because my father certainly didn't talk to me about his experiences. Or was it the Official Secrets Act and he didn't want to talk about?
No, really interesting, Tony. No, it's interesting because what happened was I connected with, I don't know how this worked out, but basically in the 1970s, my dad reconnected with a friend who was in the camp with him. So somebody in the Isle of Man. So they started writing letters to each other in the 1970s. And it was really fascinating because I then met this guy, or connected with this guy's widow years later. And she said, would you like to have the letters that your dad wrote in the 1970s to Bill? Okay, so I got these letters. So Dad's writing, and he's saying to this Bill, this ex-POW, he's basically telling him what happened next. Oh, my first wife died, and I got married again. I'm in this place called Kilskeary. I'm in an old railway station. The Irish are all fighting each other. It's so depressing. And nobody wants to talk about the war. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, he's just waiting for somebody to kind of, I mean, in that environment, there probably wouldn't have been a kind of rural Irish community. There wouldn't have been too many people who would have had a service. So you'd have been quite unique. And but sad. But, honestly, as I said, watching the films with him, never mentioned it, and that would have been the big moment. I think that would have been a wow, Dad, you were there. You met Steve McQueen. Did you get on his bike? Yeah.
What happened to your father's regiment? Have they got records?
Great question. Yeah, I mean, obviously from the war diaries that I read in the Imperial War Museum, I was able to discover they basically ended up back in North Africa, so they got caught up in the whole El Alamein. Ended at Tunis was very bad. So it's really sad because and Dad actually did find this out. Some of the people that he got friendly with, some of the officers who were around from the time when he first kind of joined up, kind of actually died in Tunis, and they ended up fighting. They went right through to the end of the war. They were at Arnhem, Operation Overlord, pressing into kind of Germany in 1945. So they were really right there. The 64th Medium Regiment, quite an illustrious kind of history, and obviously, he missed all that, but came back home in one piece.
How are you, Geoff? Good to see you.
Thanks. How's yourself?
And what a great story you told of your family. A very personal story, I'd imagine. But your father sounds like there's a movie in this. And I imagine when you were saying about McQueen, Steve McQueen, and what I remind me of Liam Neeson in Schindler's List, this sort of ability to be able to spot the good in people. Yeah. Who would be the film star who would play your father in that movie?
Oh my God. Well, you mentioned Liam Neeson. I'll sell for him, yeah. The big fella, yeah, that'll do. Oh my goodness. Yeah. But you're right, there's so many kind of stories that are still need to be told, and the Grimson thing, George Grimm, these were really, really ordinary people from ordinary backgrounds. I think, when you think of Second World War POWs, you tend to think of the officer class, and it was all a bit of a jolly. My dad was treated like an officer. He was lucky. He actually had a Batman at one point. Do you know what that means? He had somebody folding his clothes for him and making his bed. This is actually before they went to war, but it was still, what the. And he couldn't deal with that. He found it very hard to, but there you go.
Okay, I'm sorry we have to call questions to a close there. Can we just give our appreciation to Geoff for an amazing talk? And a quick reminder that the pot is here if you'd like to support Geoff's Plaque Fund. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you again to Geoff.
Cheers, thank you. Yeah, see you all on Friday night outside the Tooth in Granada.